So good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Baxter. I'm the Director of Programming and Engagement for the New Hampshire Tech Alliance. We're excited to bring you this webinar today as part of our ongoing partnership with the New Hampshire SBDC. In addition, this month, this event's co-sponsored by UNH Innovation. The New Hampshire Tech Alliance is a statewide technology association designed to support, engage, and grow the tech ecosystem in New Hampshire. Through the support of our members and our sponsors, we're able to offer programming designed to support the tech community in New Hampshire. Earlier this year, we kicked off our partnership with the New Hampshire SBDC to bring cybersecurity programming, resources, and tools to the local community. Cybersecurity is an important topic, and even more so in October, which is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. The New Hampshire Small Business Development Center offers small businesses expert confidential business advising and education, including webinars and a dozen new e-courses. They can work with businesses of any size, up to 500 employees, any industry, and any stage of growth. As I mentioned, this webinar is also co-sponsored by UNH Innovation. UNH Innovation is leading a U.S. small business administration initiative called Foster, to increase proposals for small business innovation research and small business technology transfer grants in the state of New Hampshire. Foster offers training on the SBIR and STTR submission process, as well as guidance and one-on-one proposal preparation support for qualified companies. Just a reminder, this event is recorded and will be made available on the New Hampshire SBDC YouTube page. And you can type any questions you'd like in the chat. We'll answer those either as we go or at the end. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Diana Kelly. Diana is a CTO and a founding partner at Security Curve. She has over 30 years of cybersecurity experience and donates much of her time to volunteer work in the cybersecurity community. She's a co-author of the books Practical Cybersecurity Architecture and Cryptographic Libraries for Developers. Her list of accomplishments and experience is endless, and we're so happy to have her join us today. Please join me in welcoming Diana Kelly.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and thanks everybody for being here. Oh, thank you. It's really good to be here. I love speaking to other fellow New Hampshireites because I'm usually speaking around the world, so it's great to be in my home state. So we're going to be talking about the psychology of cybercrime, which sometimes is called the softer side. And the reason that it is that it's not the technical aspects. This is really what the criminals do to get into our brains and to try and get us to respond. And once you start to understand what kind of buttons they're pushing inside of us, it can be easier to identify what we're seeing. And also for me, it gets me a little bit angry too, because I can see the manipulation. So we're gonna get started with sharing the slides. Can you guys see that? Yep, good. Okay. So in order to, let's see. So, there we go. So the baseline for what I use on this is really Cialdini's 6 principles of persuasion. Cialdini is Robert Cialdini. He is a professor of psychology and marketing at University of Arizona, and he wrote an incredible book on the power of persuasion and how we get persuaded. And his point there was actually marketing, obviously, if he does marketing work and research. And it's how marketers get us to respond, how they get us to say, I need that, I'm going to buy that. But what's really interesting is that those same powers of persuasion work on us saying, I need to click that, I need to download that. And that's what the attackers want us to do. So we'll get into how they get us to click. There's a lot of research here that shows the underlying reality of why we're doing this. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can leverage the fact that we do a lot of things because we're human, and how we can leverage that to enable us to be able to be better about creating a resistant culture that knows when we're getting attacked, or at least suspects when something might be phishing us. But to get us started about that we're all human, I really love this clip because it's just such a great reminder of our own humanity. And if you've seen it before, I have too. I just enjoy it again. If you haven't seen it, it's just a really good way of looking or understanding what we do as human beings. and why the attackers are able to take advantage.
We've been hearing a lot about cybersecurity lately, largely because of what happened to Sony. Companies and individuals are more concerned about the safety and privacy of their information than ever. President Obama has unveiled a number of new proposals this week to crack down on hackers, and he plans to address this in the State of the Union speech on Tuesday. And it's great that the government is working on this, but the truth of the matter is we need to do a better job of protecting ourselves. You know, the most popular password in the United States is password 123. And as long as that's the case, we're vulnerable. So today we sent a camera out on a Hollywood Boulevard to help people by asking them to tell us their password. And this is how that went.
We're talking about cybersecurity today and how safe people's passwords are. What is one of your online passwords currently?
It is my dog's name and the year I graduated from high school.
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
I have a Chihuahua Papillon.
And what's its name?
Jameson.
Jameson. And where'd you go to school?
I went to school back in Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
What school?
Hempfield Area Senior High School.
Oh, when did you graduate?
In 2009.
Oh, great.
It's like my cat's name and then just like a random number.
Okay. Have you had this cat for a while?
Yeah, she's my childhood pet.
Aw. And what's her name?
Her name is Jolie.
Jolie. So like a password of yours would be Jolie and then a number.
Yeah.
Like number 1?
Like my birthday,
Oh, when is your birthday?
June 12th,
Oh, nice. And what year were you born?
95.
Oh, great. So Jolie, 6/12,
Nine.
95.
Yes.
Got it.
So you mean to give my password right now? No, I cannot do that.
But we all want to know what it is so we can tell you if it's strong or not.
Oh my goodness. Let me think. Okay, one is Tel Aviv. Yeah. 468, and then Israel. It's only 3, but it's for me it's strong enough.
Ireland, 1, 2, 3, 4. Gemma, 1, 2, 3. Spelled Gemma.
Well, most of them are Italian.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
Like what's a good Italian password?
my grandma's name,
What's your grandma's name?
Maria.
Maria. So Maria is your password?
Oh yeah, now you know my password. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, the important thing is they learned a terrible lesson.
So if you were looking at that and thinking, I wouldn't do that, the truth is that a lot of people, if you notice that the person who was asking the questions she did it really, really well, because she didn't just say, for a lot of them, what's your password? It was, oh, it's about my dog. What's your dog's name? Who isn't excited to say their dog's name, right? So she was really just touching on a lot of these things that are very human and that we respond to. And you could see that just by kind of catching them up, that they would then, after the fact, realize, oh goodness, I've just given you my password. But they didn't mean to give out their password. It was in that conversation, and that's part of the action of persuasion, is to distract us a little bit and to get us into this response pattern. And this response pattern, interestingly, is there's a term for this, which is it's a fixed action pattern that we have. And sometimes people will call it the click whir that happens to human beings and happens to other animals and creatures, including birds and other mammals, like other mammals like us. But so with birds, for example, here they were looking at the hardwired activity of the bird. And this one, there's a gray lag goose egg. And Lorenz was the researcher who saw this and saw that the gray lag goose was actually making their own click whir shortcuts in decision making. And what they did was they were retrieving things that looked like their eggs and putting them back into the nest. So they would start, instead of, first they tried just an egg. If you move the egg out of the nest, then the gray lag goose is going to do what it should, right? It takes the egg and it puts it back into the nest. But it would take ovoid or egg-like objects that weren't actually its own eggs and also return them to the nest. And that's because it's that clipboard pattern. It's a shortcut in decision making, and it actually makes us a lot faster as human beings. Because if we had to process all of the data constantly anew every time we did something, we'd be really slow. I mean, think about the first time that you drove a path to a new, if you moved moved to a new house and you went to the grocery store the first time. Everything was kind of coming at you and you're like, I need to remember this road and this turn. Now you go to that same grocery store and you're just on complete autopilot. And that's because our brains take these shortcuts, and these shortcuts make us faster and smarter and better able to do things. But it also puts us at risk if somebody takes advantage of that on us. So our own mental shortcuts prevent the decision fatigue, but it also can lead to, in modern times, creating some kind of shortcuts that may not be the best for us. So one thing that human beings do very often is that we go to purchase something. We very often think that if it's more expensive, it's better. And that's a click word, that's a shortcut, because that's how we've been trained. That's what the data we've seen has, is in general, you get what you pay for. So instead of doing all of the decision process and analysis, oftentimes we'll kind of default to, well, the more expensive one is probably going to be better. And then if you go to the store, you'll note that they start to take advantage of us that way too, because very often they'll put the expensive ones right at our eye line or right above our eye line, because they want us to kind of just mentally go and grab those. So the attackers too understands that we take shortcuts, and they use these for compliance. And compliance, in this phraseology, it's a behavioral psychology term, and it means when somebody does what somebody else wants to do. So I'm not trying to be like weird using that term or anything. There's a whole movie actually about this, about how compliance and getting people to do things for you. But this is what they're trying to do, is they're trying to shortcut our natural responses for that compliance. And a compliance, in the case of an attacker that's coming after us, most of the time is to get us to click on a phishing email, an email that comes into our inbox that looks legitimate. It's coming from our cable company saying it's time to pay your bill, or from a doctor saying log into the patient portal and get information about your latest checkup or your latest blood tests, right? All these different ways that they try and get us to click, and they all come back to different ways of persuading us. And as I said, I think Cialdini's 6 principles are really, really useful to understand, because they help us understand how the attackers are taking advantage of us, but they help us understand how we can do a couple of things. One is recognize when the attackers are using it and go, The other thing it helps us do is that, as if you're a business owner or your manager or a leader at your company, it enables us to understand what's going to work better when we're training our employees to be more resistant to these kinds of trickery that the attackers are using. So the first principle from Cialdini is reciprocity. And this one's actually kind of nice, is that human beings tend to be pretty fair. So we by nature have a level of return. If somebody gives us something, we want to return something. Even that person who was asking the questions in the video, the Jimmy Kimmel video, that person was, she was saying things like, "Oh, that's so cute about your dog." That was a level of reciprocity and interaction. And reciprocity is actually really much stronger in humans than you might think. So one of the pieces of research here showing that reciprocity is a very real part of who and what we are as human beings is that they did a test with, and I have all of the research at the bottom, and if you guys want the slides afterwards, I can share that so you guys can click through and read more deeply into some of this research, because obviously I'm doing a shortcut myself by giving you the highlights of them. But in this case, it was around tipping. And if you gave somebody a mint at the end of the meal, they were more likely to increase their tip by 18 to 21%. So the people that got the mints tipped higher than the people who didn't get the mints. And this is just like, just some chocolate, right? A little piece of, 1 penny chocolate or a mint, but reciprocity is so strong in human beings that you give me something for free, it's more likely that I'm going to give you something back. There was another piece of research that was really interesting around this, where if someone was given a free soda, then they were more likely to buy a raffle ticket. Again, you give something, you're more likely to get something. So think of that the next time that somebody gives you something, anything for free. What are they trying to get back from you? Another level of reciprocity that I thought was really neat was around, and it's a good time for this, was around the holidays. They sent out holiday cards in this piece of research to 578 random people. Just here's a nice holiday card, celebrate the season, here you go. 20% of those people actually sent one back because, you know, I've done it. I've been like, did I forget one of my spouse's relatives or something, you know, where it's like, is that somebody I met and I forgot, you know? So I'll just better do the nice thing, and you send back. So yeah, 20% of people just random, didn't know them, but they sent that holiday card back. So we're pretty fair. And if you give somebody something, we're likely to give them something back. So keep that in mind, again, as we get to when we start looking at the fish themselves. So the next thing in persuasion is scarcity. When things are scarce, we really want things more than when they're not scarce. And salespeople use this all the time. Think of all the home shopping networks. They say things like, you know, hurry before it's all gone. We only have 100 of these blankets or 100 of these crock pots, right, to sell. Well, of course they don't. They have many more than 100 of them. They can get more. Their supply, they can get more. It's not a true limited thing. It's just that they create that scarcity because they know that that's actually going to get us to respond. And the way that this was proven out in the research that I thought was really interesting was around cookies and students, and bringing students in and asking them to say, you know, which cookie do you like better? Do you like the oatmeal cookie versus the chocolate chip cookie versus the biscotti? And the less of a kind of cookie there was, the higher they were rated on appeal. And they did this in a number of different modes to really make sure it wasn't just that people thought the biscotti were always better. It really came down to the scarcity. But then the most interesting thing I thought of this research was that what was even more appealing than something that was scarce was when it became scarce. And that we see this happen in real estate a lot, right? Where, you know, if it seems like, oh, there's a bunch of houses available, if there's a whole lot of houses on the market, then the prices get kind of soft or depressed. As soon as houses start to go, and this happened in New Hampshire, we saw our property values all went up in New Hampshire because we became really attractive to folks from Massachusetts in the pandemic that wanted to have a little bit more space. So we saw what was available for purchase in New Hampshire went down in terms of housing, and then a lot of housing and property and areas went up in value. And that's because we're hardwired. This is another click word that we have hardwired to: when something becomes scarce after it was initially abundant, then we rate that as very valuable. The third aspect of persuasion that works on humans is authority. So the classic, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. And I have a picture up here of the way back in the day when doctors used to recommend one kind of cigarette over another because Camels are the better, safer cigarette than the other cigarette. But it was coming from a doctor, so that actually at a point in time was meaningful to people. The Milgram experiment, and I apologize in advance that this experiment is a little bit it's notorious because it would never be allowed to be done today. It was done back in the 60s. You wouldn't be able to get away with doing this experiment today. Nobody was actually hurt in the experiment. I want to be very clear about that. But the actual test subject thought that they were hurting somebody. So that was the way that the experimenters were able to get out this kind of information. But I do, even though it's notorious because of that aspect, it really did show the power of authority, because the way that the Milgram experiment worked was that the experimenter brought in a subject and said, look, we have to do this. This is really important research that we're doing. Engage with us in this research. You know, they really played it up to the test subjects, how important it was that the test subject worked with the experimenter, because it was going to be valuable scientific data that they were discovering. And what they were doing was they were pretending the tester was having the subject give shocks to the fake test subject. So the real test subject was administering the shocks. The fake test subject wasn't actually getting shocked. They were just behaving as though they got shocked. And what they were trying to do was to see how far the test subject would listen to the experimenter. So they weren't really testing pain the way that they said they were testing authority. And when the test subject started to say, look, I feel uncomfortable, this other person is in pain, the experimenter would say, no, urge them to keep going. This is really important. You've got to do it. We're going to increase the voltage. We've got to keep going with this experiment. And when the experimenter played that up and really played the authority card, 65% of the test subjects did go up to the maximum voltage, right? Again, no real shocks were being given, but they thought that they were giving those shocks, and they saw somebody pretending to have that shock. So 65% did go past what they felt comfortable doing because of authority. And again, this is not to call anybody out. It's not that they did something wrong. This is just the reality of how people are. Just as a lot of people gave out their passwords, when we hear authority, very often we take that very much to heart, and we do what the person in authority says. And authority, keep that in mind as we get to seeing the actual phishing emails and thinking about phishing emails, because authority is one of the things that the attackers play against us again and again and again. Consistency. So we're actually fairly consistent as a species. We like to stay the course. If you've ever seen political yard signs, for example, you may think that that's, and I used to think this before I understood the research on what the real drivers were. I thought that people would put up political signs just because they wanted everybody else to know who they were voting for. I support this person. I want you to know. I want to promote that. But the reason that the candidates really want us to put the signs up is partly to announce to the rest of the neighborhood that, yeah, we support them. But it's because if we put that sign up, the likelihood that we're going to switch our vote goes way down. Just putting the sign in our yard now creates consistency, and we're a lock-in vote. So sure, we're helping to promote that candidate, but we're a lock-in vote. And that's really why I want us to have that sign in the yard, because now they're like, we know that house is going to vote for whoever. So it's that consistency aspect. Another aspect of consistency is with fitness trackers, right? They kind of gamify our working out and say, well, you worked out last week, you're on a streak, you've now got 53 weeks of working out, right? Who wants to blow their 53-week streak? So we keep working out, which is good. It's a good, healthy thing, but they're taking advantage of the fact, or leveraging positively the fact that we as human beings, consistency is a powerful driver. And some research along these lines were with hotel towels and checking in. And you've probably seen these at hotels, save the planet, reuse this towel. But in this research, what they did was on check-in, they said, if you agree to be environmentally friendly, we'll give you a lapel pin. I mean, who knows what kind of, you want to wear this lapel pin? And probably people would get it and never wear it again. But it's like, well, it created that level of consistency, like putting up the sign in your yard. So when they agreed, they were 25% more likely to hang the towels for reuse when they agreed at check-in. And then overall, just even the asking, there was an increase in hanging the towels, even if they didn't agree to do it. They just overall, more people were hanging them up. So it just created this level of consistency. If they got something, they were even more likely to do it. But overall, it rose the likelihood for people to do it at all. And then liking. We've all been living the liking for the last 15, 20 years with social media. We've seen that people definitely like likes. There's been a lot of research around how we get kind of addicted to likes. This is one of the things in social media, is that you can get really caught up, and there's been concerns about teenagers, for example, maybe getting too caught up in liking, having things in sync, having other people like what they post. Instagrammers, really working and sometimes it's the detriment of their own mental health, kind of going for those likes, going for the grams. And the research on this one is from back to that raffle experiment for Dennis Regan. He had in the raffle experiment found out that if you give somebody a soda, they're more likely to buy the raffle ticket. But there was another aspect of this research that was really cool that related to the liking. And it was that the soda was brought by somebody that they had, Joe, here's Joe. Joe's bringing you the soda. And then they tested to see were people more likely to buy the raffle ticket from Joe or from somebody that they didn't know yet. And Joe, not only by giving them the soda, increased the likelihood that they would buy the ticket, but also it was much more likely that they would buy the ticket from Joe because they liked Joe. Joe was now their friend or their buddy. So that kind of changed. If you like somebody, if you feel close to them, then you're more likely to do something for them. And attackers, sometimes in the really long form roles, if you've known of anybody who's ever been catfished online or has had a long-term relationship with somebody who's trying to steal data or money or information from them, liking is something that attackers play up again and again, because if they can get us to like them, we're much more likely to do what they're asking, that level of compliance. And then consensus. So this is kind of linked into likes. There's one is, I like you, you like me, I'm more likely to do something. But then there's, if everybody's doing it. So if you see somebody, if you see, 1,000 people liking something, you might look at that and be more likely to like it yourself. And this is really that wisdom of the crowd aspect. And the research here that shows the underlying behavior, it was a light dot experiment. And in this experiment, they had individuals go into a room and look at a stationary dot of light. Now, interestingly, if you did this yourself, there's something called autokinetics, where our brains just start to see that dot move around a little bit, because that's the way that our brains and visual acuity work. So if you light that one dot of light, we would start to actually see it move a little bit, but it wasn't actually moving. But then they asked the individuals afterwards, how much is this moving? And people said, most of the time they said actually a little bit, because that's just the autokinetic phenomena occurring. But people kind of got to, this is how much I think it's moving. And they were there, they felt comfortable with it. And then they got into a group, and some people had it was moving a lot. Some people said it was never moving. When they got into the group, what happened was people kind of normalized how much they saw. As people started to talk, they reassessed, was it moving as much as they thought? And they got to sort of a normalized middle. And there's a consensus, which actually is kind of nice when you get enough people in a room and have them engage in a conversation in a respectful way. We tend to, again, as a species, we tend to draw towards a middle ground or to consensus, which is interesting because I know a lot of what's going on in the United States right now. Politically, it feels like, oh my gosh, we seem to just be pulling apart. But quite frankly, no, when we do get into, or we talk about something that's not politically charged, like was that dot moving, we tend to actually come into consensus. So people changed what they believed because of this consensus activity. But then what was really interesting is that this was normalized, so it persisted. Even when they were no longer with the group, they retained that normalized consensus-based view on whether or not that dot was moving or how much that dot was moving. So there's a pretty powerful draw towards consensus. So those actually, let me stop there for a sec. Does anybody have any question on the 6 principles, on any of the research I explained, if I went through any of it too fast or anything? Because next what I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about how the attackers use it. Oh, okay. It looks like John has a question.
Well, would you mind re-showing that early slide that had the list of the principles?
Yeah.
Or just helping me remember.
Yeah. So these are the 6. They're reciprocity, giving to each other, scarcity, authority, consistency, that's keeping to, I'm going to do this, liking, and which is part of association bias, and consensus. Okay. Anyone else, or any thoughts on any of those before we go on? Because next I'm going to show you how the attackers are using this. Okay. So now that we've got those principles and what's driving us, let's take a look at some actual phish. And I've got examples from a couple of well-known phishing sites. And phish is the name that is given to the emails that attackers send when they want to get us to do something. They want us to comply. Kind of for fun, if anybody doesn't know, if you've ever wondered why it's called phishing, it's partly because it is phishing, right? You're actually trying to reel in somebody. So that's where the phishing part comes. But why the PH? It's because way back in the day, we used to call it phone phreaking. If you remember in the 70s and 80s, when it was incredibly expensive to just even call somebody in the next town over, because you had like your circle of who you could call, and forget trying to call, across the country. It was just really expensive. There was this group of hackers that were, quote, phone phreakers, and of course phone with a PH, phreak was with a PH, and they figured out how to use the tones in the phone systems to get free calls. And then that PH-ness kind of lived on, and it became the PH at the beginning of phishing. So that's why we have this very strange spelling of phishing when we're talking about an attacker trying to lure us in by email. And you may also hear it as things like smishing, which is an SMS or a text phish, or vishing if somebody tries to video phish you. But it's all the same underlying thing of an attacker trying to give you some bait that you find attractive so that they can lure you in to do what they want you to do. So here we go with this phish, and it's come from phishing.org, and there are a lot of good examples at phishing.org. I've also got some from Symantec. So if you want to take a look at more example phishes that are real phish that were seen out and encountered out in the wild, this one, it looks pretty good, right? It doesn't look really like way off. This is not your typical, give me $1 million and I'll give you $10 million back. It's got the real PayPal logo. It's really easy to get logos, right? You can go down online and download anybody's logo in nice high res. So they get the logo, and then they have, so that's up at the top. And what is that? That's connected to? That's authority, because we trust PayPal. They've got a level of authority, and we've got financial, accounts with them. So they're using the authority and the trust that we have in PayPal to try and gain our compliance. And then down here, it's interesting, they've got to help us with this and see what you can and can't do with your account until the issue is resolved, log in and go to the resolution center. And I kind of like this one because there's a little bit of like a reciprocity here, right? They're like, can you help us with this? Please help us to address the fact that you've got a problem with an issue in your PayPal account. So you're nervous, it's PayPal, you trust them, you want your payments to go through, and now, hey, help us out with this and log in. Now, if you click on that login, do you think that you go to PayPal and that there's actually a problem in the account? No. If you click on that link, you go to a site that looks just like PayPal, but is not PayPal. And when you enter your user ID and password, an attacker gets it and then has access to your PayPal account. Couple of other ones. This is from Symantec. Oh, it's Norton now. From Norton. Again, we've got authority on both of these. And this is again and again and again, you'll see authority. They use this all the time. They go from trusted sources that you take, you trust, trusted sources that you trust, but that they want that authority push. So the Instagram and IRS, and then we've got here again, please sign in. And this one is kind of nice because they've given you a one-time code. So now they're implying that, and that one-time code, guess what? It's not, you don't need that one-time code. It's not helping you at all, but it gives it this layer of this, patina of, oh, this must be a really serious, this is the real deal. Look, they're even giving me this special code to log in one time. And now the IRS, they love the IRS because all of us get scared of the IRS. I have had phone calls that are, the phone phishing calls from the IRS that, like, I gotta admit, I'll have a panic moment with, the IRS is gonna garnish your house. It's like, there's a moment, I mean, when you're like, And I'm like, oh gosh, no, of course not. The IRS would never like, God, exactly. Yeah, they're trying to reel me in. So yeah, the IRS gets us all on edge a little bit. There's a lot of authority here. And this one, they just simple, there's an error in calculation, get started and go claim your refund. So who wouldn't want that? You kind of like them now because they're giving you a refund. And again, you click on there, get started. We all know where this is going. They're just going to steal your information. A couple more that I thought was interesting. On the left, what we've got is a different approach. Instead of coming from a well-known place, phishers also, and if you hear something called BEC or business email compromise, that's when you get spear phishing and very focused phishing emails to business executives. And what they do there is they start to actually research about who you are, who your company is, and try and catch you that way by this knowledge about your organization or your company. One of the most interesting fish I saw was actually after a party. It was a corporate party, and they had posted online on different social media at the party, and somebody had done something silly, but there was just a photo of it. There wasn't a video. And the fish, or the spearfish the next day, purported to come from somebody inside of the company. And if you think they can't figure out who works at your company, LinkedIn. LinkedIn gives them a nice little map of, and I love LinkedIn, but it can be used to figure out who works at the company. Back in the day, they used to get the corporate, they would actually just call up the headquarters and ask for the company phone books, like physical books about who worked at larger companies. But attackers have been really good at figuring out who works where. And the next day, it came from somebody else in the company. They said, hey, remember when so-and-so did such and such at the party last night, which they knew because it had been posted on social media. I got a video of it. I mean, my gosh, at that point, who's stopping to think this is an attacker? It's like, you're just thinking, wow, so-and-so, Bob did that crazy thing. The photo was funny enough. I can't wait to see the video. This is hilarious, right? Click, gotcha. So in this one, it's a little closer. It's more of a spearfish. It's saying, here are the vendor banking instructions for a payment that was supposed to go out. So they've got that timed base, and time base is a side of the scarcity, because running out gets us going. So it's running out of the cookies, or I'm running out of time, I need to pay this. And time and authority are two things that again and again and again that you will see. Think about the next fish that you get, look at that, and see what kind of tricks they're using. But that time, that scarcity comes in quite a lot, making it time-based. So I need you to process this immediately. That gets our adrenaline up. It gets us much more likely to start the click whir pattern and to stop thinking logically and start going into that. I need to get this done. And it's a good thing. It's how we get through all the emails we get every day. So this is not necessarily that, people are just not paying attention. It's they're taking advantage of what makes us effective. And then this one is a request, another, sort of a spearfish coming. It appears to come from the CEO to the CFO and saying, go ahead and transfer $250,000. And if you're looking at that and you're thinking like, somebody would rethink on $250,000. I have seen, so two things I've seen. One was actually getting in line with a legitimate payment that was a 7-figure payment, and taking the actual email from the vendor that needed to be paid and just changing one thing in the email, which was the routing information, and sending that through. And that was a success. And the only reason that it didn't work was that the bank actually stopped and had a question about it. So everything else had gone through. The other one was there was a dire wolf campaign that went on when I was working at IBM. And in the dire wolf campaign, the targets did transfer 7 figures, and so $1 million, and sometimes a couple of $1 million. And it was because of a man-in-the-middle attack inside the browser. But people were what they did was they got the targets to read off the one-time password on. This was long enough ago that was actually a physical token, but they read that one-time number that was coming up on there to the attacker. And the attacker then was able to transfer the money. So if you look at $250,000 and you think, oh, that's a lot to transfer, there have been attacks where a significantly more amount of money has transferred out. So they're successful, and they're going to keep going after us, after the victims, all of us who are criminals or potential victims, because it works. So what can we do to turn this around? We can leverage this power of persuasion. We can use it for good and model the right behavior with ourselves and with our employees. So start turning this back on the attackers and turn it also towards ourselves. So one thing to do that is useful is if you ask your staff to commit to security principles. So you might have acceptable use policies when they came on, but ask them to actually commit and say, I know that I'm part of the solution. I want to be a strong and positive security influence at this organization, at this university, at this nonprofit, at this company, and have them pledge to the security principles. That's going to build on consistency. It's like I voted, and they can tell other people I did that too, so that starts to create consensus. The more people that do it, the more people that are going to most likely want to do it. You can also give things away to people if they have, signed the principles, they have committed to security. And it can be something as simple as like a sticker, as a lapel pin. They might wear that sticker for 2 hours and then throw it away, but it gets that little bit of reciprocity. You don't have to give them a lot, just show them that you've given them something. Thank you can go a long way too. Or you could enter them into a lottery, but to give them like a $25 gift certificate. The lottery is useful, but the reason I like something for everybody is that gives reciprocity to absolutely everyone. And then authority. This helps if you're in a position of power at your company. If you're one of the executives, you get on board too. Not only take the pledge and be part of the, this is great, we've signed on, but also say that this is important to the company. You make it clear that it really matters, that you take it seriously too. I've worked with a lot of CEOs and CFOs at companies that they kind of feel like the rules are different for them than for others. This isn't going to happen if we're going to make cyber something that everybody does and becomes something that we're all responsible for. Then we can't have it's just me. And one of my favorite stories of this was a CIO, and I loved it because she was like I was wrong, when she told me the story. But a CIO told me the story where she had banned all online shopping during the holidays because she didn't want people wasting time. So she said, that's it, I'm banning the shopping. And she put in controls to actually test whether, to see if people were going to shopping sites. And so the IT team was all poised. They're like, we're watching for this. Anybody shops, we're going to do it. And so she was in a big meeting, and everybody was doing really pretty well. She was in a big meeting, and the IT team came in and they said, they talked to her and they're like, what? Well, it turned out that the only person who had violated the shopping policy was her. So you don't want to be the person who violates your own policy. Set a policy. And that's the other thing, is when you're setting security policies, think about what you're comfortable with too as an executive, because if you're not comfortable with it, why should your team be comfortable with it? But it does matter a lot when everybody gets on board. Some other ways to model the best behavior is to start thinking about the security awareness training that you do. You're really sort of like, this is internal consulting, and the people that you're trying to get to do the right thing, they become your customers. So get the idea of how you're going to engage them in doing the right thing and to like you, right? You don't want to be the team that comes in and says, you can't do this. You want to be the team. You're not doing anything wrong. You're not telling people not to click on something that's good. You're asking them to not click on bad phishing emails, to protect the company. So get them to like you by being positive about that training. And I am just such a big fan of positive reinforcement, because negative reinforcement, it doesn't really motivate us that well. Also, even positive reinforcement has its limits. There was just some really cool research that came out in the last couple of weeks about children and how we get children to do things. They found out that punishing the children wasn't that great, but also rewarding the children was not. It was more effective. But the most effective thing was if the child actually wanted to do the thing, if they could understand the underlying reason for it and chose to do it. That's when we've got our own motivation. That's when we're the most powerful. So try, and if people like you and understand why we're asking them to do some of these security things, then they're going to be much more likely to actually do it. And then the positive security behaviors. I have seen these like wall of shames and who clicked. And if you've ever been in that security awareness training where you click on the fish and you get the, you're a fool, you know, I mean, because there are some really negative ones that come up where they're like, oh, you're bad. And then I've even seen companies say, you know, these are the 10 people that clicked, which is, do not shame people. It is not going to do any good. What's a lot better is if you do something like catch of the month, where whoever finds the craziest fish, and maybe even they find the fish and they say, look at these 3 different dimensions of persuasion in this fish. Say, hey, look at this employee. They found this fish. They reported it to the help desk, and the help desk was able to run it down. Maybe they could see that there was something they could block through the mail hygiene program, so nobody else got that fish. Celebrate that. Celebrate the good. Don't shame the bad. As you're doing your security awareness training, either adopting it or revising it, think about the personas of the people at your company and what's going to matter to them, because you've got a lot of different employees and a lot of different jobs. If you're dealing with, you know, if you're in healthcare, for example, you got a lot of doctors, and doctors have their, if you're in higher ed too, you got a lot of PhDs. Don't like to be talked down to. A lot of doctors, a lot of PhDs feel like they're kind of the smartest people in the room. So you want to, you know, that's certainly a persona that you have to take into account versus, let's say you're in a retail environment and you've got a lot of really busy cashiers and a lot of busy stock folks. Maybe they're younger, and so they have a different way of interacting with technology than someone who's older. Just think about, there's no one right or wrong way. Just think about who it is that you're training, because one thing that I do see again and again with security awareness is it's very one size fits all. And sometimes that does not work with the variety of different people that you need to train. So if you've got, you know, especially, you know, specific kinds of groups, think about who they are, how they're going to learn best, and you may need to tune some of that training for them to make sure that you're hitting home. And what can work, because for compliance purposes and regulatory purposes in some industries, you may need to just have a core level of training. That's fine. I'm not saying break whatever you need for compliance. It's just use that as the baseline. Everybody gets that training. And then you may have additional training for different user groups that may need to have a different approach in order for them to learn it. And do understand the behavior intention. So how people are likely to respond in a given situation. You know, be careful when you are phishing your own, if you do is that your own fish, internal fish as part of your security awareness training, be careful with making it look too good. I've seen some fish where there's literally no way for anybody to understand that it was a fish, and then they get shamed for clicking on it. So you want to be, you know, understand the intention and give people, you know, a little bit of their own, you know, a chance to get things right. And then if you do anything with sales, I love this. This is some ISACA research that came out. They said, what if we took a sales customer journey approach to security awareness training? And they found that could really help to funnel down, but instead of funneling down to the action of buy, we funnel down to the action of integrating new behaviors and how we interact with things like fish and how we interact with technology. So taking advantage of that approach can really help a lot, and can help you create a socially engineering resistant culture. And social engineering, we talked about fish a lot. I talked about fish a lot, but it can really come in anywhere. It could be somebody who picks up the phone and calls people. The social engineers are trying to get people through LinkedIn. They're direct messaging them on Twitter now. They're coming in a lot of different ways. They often act as recruiters. That's a huge one lately, is taking advantage of recruiter. There's Reciprocity. I can get you a job. But it's not really a job. It's me getting a lot of your personal information, or maybe information about your company. So creating that social engineering resistant culture is, instead of telling people that they're wrong or they're not getting it or they're stupid or you shouldn't have given Jimmy Kimmel your password, you lean into what makes us human. and our human nature and our click-word patterns that help us to be better and more effective. But explain that to people so they understand about those shortcuts, and then give them the power to understand our own shortcuts and how to stop our own actions, and also how to build that around the culture of the corporation into your training, so that instead of the bad guys weaponizing this against us, we're using it to help ourselves be stronger and to help our companies be stronger. And one of the big PowerPoints here is what's known as S4, which is see something, say something. This builds that consensus. It creates a culture, and it really gets people all involved. So if people see themselves as first responders, if you're the front line, I stop, what if somebody could say, I stopped WannaCry, I stopped a ransomware attack. It's because I saw a bad email coming in and I reported it. That makes people feel really powerful. And that actually is a reality that can happen. When I worked at IBM Security, we had such a deeply security aware culture that one time one of our colleagues was on vacation, and by accident, he started a chat in same time with like 150 of us. And then he realized what he'd done. He closed the lid and he's like, oops. But we're all now in this chat together going, where is he? And instead of just going, he's on vacation, it's probably a mistake, we started to flood the help desk because we were afraid that somebody had gotten into IBM Security, and that rather than just thinking this was some quirk of the system, or that it was just a mistake, right? We thought, oh, this could potentially be us under attack, because we were so security, strong and resilient in the company that was it. We kept thinking that way. And then the help desk finally had to tell us to calm down, because it really was, he just made a mistake. They caught him on vacation and talked to him and cleared everything up. But I would rather a company and a culture that has that level of awareness than a culture where you ignore the signals and the tells of an attacker who's in the organization, or who's trying to get information from your employees. And so in summary, really we all use click-word. We have to. We can't get by in the complexity of the world. I mean, the sheer number of emails that we have to parse every day is overwhelming. So we're all using this. And the bad guys know it, and they're trying to harness it. But by using these principles, we can actually build better awareness campaigns, and we can build stronger, more resilient employees and people, including ourselves, to be stronger against all forms of social engineering. So I thank you so much for your attention and your time on this. I'd be happy to answer any questions people have, or any just thoughts if you've seen a particularly good fish recently, if you wanted to share that. Oh, so I can see from John, yeah, customer facing is to take the approach that your employees are your customers in security training. So you treat them as customers, just as if we're trying to engage a customer to come to our company and engage with us. As you're doing the training, think of that in a customer facing mindset. So you're dealing with your employees that way.
Yeah, I'll share a quick example. So we had another cybersecurity presentation a couple weeks ago, and I am new to the organization and happened to notice I had a bunch of emails in my spam, and all of them were legitimate emails. But then I had one from my boss, and I was like, this one looks weird, but like the urge to click was strong, but I didn't. I called her and she's like, no. That's not for me, but all the other ones in my spam were legit. So yeah, I mean, it's just, and I've had this email for like 5 weeks at that time. So 6 weeks. So.
And that's such good. I mean, that's exactly the right behavior, is that you knew your boss, right? We know our bosses, right? We can call them and say, did you send this? And there you go. You saved the company from, who knows, could have been millions of dollars of losses.
Yay, Stephanie. Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you so much, Diana. We're so happy to have this presentation today. I think it's really interesting to look at the psychology behind it, and then use that same psychology to fight it. So I think it's really interesting. So thank you again for your time, and thank you all for joining us today. And if there's no other questions, then we'll wrap up.